Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Sap, we've been pretty good about predicting the games this playoff so far. I mean, obviously not 100%, but halfway decent. We did not do a good job last night, as both of our predictions were basically blowouts for both of the home teams. Instead, both of the home teams lost. In relatively stunning fashion. The Sixers obviously blew a big lead, and the Jazz lost at home where they've been virtually unbeatable without Kawhi Leonard for the Clippers. So not a great night for you and me in terms of predicting games.
No, I mean, the 76ers were up 26 points in the third quarter, having their way. Joel Embiid was unstoppable. Seth Curry was having a great game. Ben Simmons was controlling the pace. As long as he avoided the free throw line, he was doing just fine. Tobias Harris was really a no-show throughout the game, especially in the fourth quarter, but they were fine. They were up 26 points. Midway through the third quarter, they're up 18 going into the fourth quarter, and then they just totally imploded. I think you saw some of the flaws in Joel Embiid in that game. As great as he is, and look, he's an unstoppable force, he doesn't seem to have much left in the tank in the fourth quarter. Now, the injury to his right knee obviously is a concern. I also always wonder about Joel Embiid, lack of conditioning, so that when you get to the final 12 minutes, what does he have left in the tank? He didn't have much last night. He took 5 shots in the fourth quarter. 4 of them were from 3. At 7'1", 280, get your ass down on the blocks and dominate like you should.
Is it possible that big men just naturally, because of their size, just can't have the conditioning, no matter how great shape they're in, to be able to run up and down the court for 4 quarters? Is that just, I mean, listen, when I was growing up watching basketball, obviously I watched Shaq and Hakeem and Robinson, but I was still pretty young, especially with Hakeem and Robinson. So you would have a better sense of if this is something that's happened to big men, especially great, really talented guys like Embiid in the past in NBA, or is this something that's more unique to Embiid?
Well, I think it's kind of unique to Embiid. We compare him to Shaq and Olajuwon a lot. Olajuwon is the best athlete of the 3. I mean, he was a soccer goalie in Nigeria. That shows you what a great athlete that Hakeem Olajuwon was. Impeccable footwork. I think naturally Embiid's a better athlete than Shaq. Shaq is more of a force. I mean, he's, along with Will Chamberlain, 2 greatest forces in league history. I'll go back even further, though. To me, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the 2nd greatest center in the history of the sport, just behind Bill Russell. You can make a case that Kareem is the greatest center of all time. Hell, you can make a case that Kareem's the greatest player of all time. He was always in impeccable condition. He was one of the first athletes that was worried about diet, conditioning. I remember going to shootouts the morning of final games, and Kareem would be using the elastic bands that Tom Brady now uses, and this was 35 years ago. Kareem was way ahead of his time. He was into karate. He had worked out with Bruce Lee in the early 70s. I mean, he was at the forefront of all of this. Now, Joel Embiid, I don't think is going to have the same work ethic as Kareem, because Kareem is just wired differently. But I think that that's an issue with a lot of big men. Yeah, when you're 7'1", 280, after playing 28, 30 minutes, whatever, you get to the fourth quarter, you've got a big lead. You're probably mentally checked out a little bit because it looks like you're going to win the game. Maybe it's tough to just get that big mechanism going again, right?
Right.
This is the big man we're talking about.
Yeah, when you're lugging that much weight, and he's playing a lot of minutes. I think he played, 37, 38 minutes, 39 minutes last night.
On a bad knee.
I just don't know that even if he's in tip-top shape, which I don't think he necessarily is, but I think this season he's been a little bit more dedicated to it than in the past. I don't know that he'll ever be anything but gassed at the end of games because of how big he is and because of how much the Sixers utilize him on offense, which, again, goes back to the criticism I've been giving of Ben Simmons for basically his whole career, that he doesn't take enough of the scoring burden off of Joel Embiid. So naturally, Embiid's going to get gassed. He has a massive, massive scoring burden for this team.
Without question. And I'm not laying all of the blame on Joel Embiid. In fact, if I was going to cut up the blame pie, which is what we like to do, right, on podcasts and talk radio, I'd say maybe 10% for Joel Embiid. He missed 2 free throws at the end of the game. I think he was gassed at that point, and that will impact your free throw shooting. He's a great free throw shooter. Why are you taking 4 3-pointers in the fourth quarter rather than getting down in the low blocks? That's a question that I have to ask. Fatigue, right, because it's a lot easier to just run to 30 feet away from the basket and chuck up a three than it is to go down low and impose yourself. No one can stop him in the low post. Certainly not Clint Capella. At worst, Embiid's going to go to the free throw line. So I'm only giving him about 10% of the blame because he was outstanding again. They were up 26 midway through the third quarter because of Joel Embiid and Seth Curry. I'm also going to lay some blame on the feet of Tobias Harris, who has maybe the best job in the NBA because he can go out and suck, and no one ever really talks about him sucking. He makes $37 million a year. The Philadelphia 76ers owe him close to $120 million over the next 3 years. If you're getting paid that, you better be part of the solution, not the reason that your team isn't advancing in the playoffs. He was awful last night.
Horrible.
He didn't want the ball in the
probably the worst player on the court last night.
Even worse than Simmons, because Simmons gives you some things, right? He'll give you defense. He can rebound. He can facilitate. Tobias Harris is there, decent defender, but he's there to score. He was nowhere to be found. Chet, in the second half of that game, only 2 76ers made field goals. Seth Curry, who played his ass off, and Joel Embiid, who for 3 quarters was dominant. Other than that, they couldn't get a basket from anybody on the roster in the entire second half.
The only 2 players in double figures for the team. It's not even
That's insane.
Anybody else put up 10. Nobody else. The 8 was the next highest.
And they are missing Danny Green. And I know people laughed when I said that, but he's a nice piece to a championship team. He would have maybe broken the spell and hit a 3 or made a defensive play that maybe tilted the momentum back into Philadelphia's favor. So I think Tobias Harris deserves some of the blame, but no one's going to talk about him because he's the 3rd player on the team. So no one blamed George Harrison for a bad Beatles song. It was either McCartney or Lennon. You're not going to blame Tobias Harris for this loss. Most of the blame is going to fall on Ben Simmons, as it should. 4 of 14 from the free throw line. That's putrid.
Come on.
That is absolutely putrid, Jet. You and I could do better. Seriously,
that's not even a joke.
Myself doing better. No, it's not. That's not a made-up stat. 4 of 14 from the free throw line for a guy. Look, big guys have had problems at the free throw line. This guy's a great athlete. He's a point guard. You see how he moves on the court. He's an Adonis. I mean, the guy's 6'10", 250 pounds. He has one of the best bodies in the NBA. I mean, he's as big and strong as LeBron James at times, gets to the free throw line and just doesn't want to be there. And 4 for 14. Chet, in the postseason, he's 12 of 39 from the free throw line. That's 40%. I mean,
that's horrible.
Tom Brady wins more Super Bowls. It's more likely Brady wins a Super Bowl in a given year than Ben Simmons hits a free throw.
Embarrassing. This is the thing. Like, some people will say, with kickers, you'll be like, oh yeah, I could make that kick. And no, you couldn't make that kick.
No.
You could grab a person off the street and they could do better than 4 of 14 from the free throw line. That's not hyperbole. That's a fact. The average person you grab off the street probably could at least do that, 4 of 14, most likely better. I mean, really, you could close your eyes. He could close his eyes at the line and do probably better. I mean,
Jordan used to do that, right? Remember when Jordan get bored and close his eyes and hit 2 free throws?
This is ridiculous, though, Sap.
No, it really is.
It's come on. There's absolutely, and we've been talking about this throughout the playoffs. There's no excuse for him to finish with 8 points. There's no excuse for him to finish with 4 of 14 from the free throw line. And there's even less of an excuse. This is the worst stat to me of all. He took 4 shots.
Yeah, that's crazy.
He was 2 of 4 from the floor. How does your second best player, the guy who's the number 1 pick in the draft, take 4 shots in a playoff game? This is after last game he was criticized for not being aggressive. And he said, yeah, I need to be more aggressive. You come out and you take 4 shots. Sap, he took 4. I mean, that's like mind-boggling.
It really is for a guy that talented. And again, he's not a great outside shooter, but we know he can drive to the basket. He's ambidextrous. Of course, he may be the first player in the history of the NBA that is shooting free throws with his offhand. I mean, he is left-handed. He handles the ball more with his left than his right, but he's got to change his free throw approach, whether it be the mechanics of the shot, the mentality of going up there. We know Giannis has struggled at the free throw line. Giannis, I think, cares too much. He's got this routine that takes far too long when he goes to the free throw line. I think it really burns Giannis that he's not hitting free throws, because I think Giannis has a big heart. And really, I'm sure Giannis the other night after that loss didn't sleep. With Ben Simmons, you get the feeling like he slept just fine last night, and he'll be out in Atlanta tomorrow night, and we'll see what happens. If they lose, the season's over. If they win, then they'll play, on Saturday or Sunday, whatever it is, in Philadelphia in Game 7. It doesn't seem like anything really makes him sweat at all. He seems like a cool, indifferent guy. And look, you proposed months ago that a great trade would have been, obviously, at the beginning of the year, sending Ben Simmons to Houston for
No,
James
Portland.
Harden.
Oh, that one.
Well,
Sorry. Yeah,
that
you're right.
one was,
You're right.
that would have
Yep.
been, because you picture James Harden and Joel Embiid together, a healthy Harden with Embiid. Holy crap. That would have been unstoppable. But they didn't want to give up on Ben Simmons. And there was also reports that Tillman Fertitta, the owner of the Houston Rockets, was going to trade James Harden anywhere but Philadelphia because Daryl Morey was there as the now general manager, and Fertitta doesn't want to help Daryl Morey win an NBA championship. So there's spite that comes in there. But
good way
at
to run
that
a team.
point, you're not even in the same conference. Go get the best deal you can. Right. I mean, that's like if Green Bay is going to be spiteful and will only trade Aaron Rodgers to certain teams because they don't want to see him win a Super Bowl, get better players for him than not. Forget that part. Hell, Bill Belichick traded Drew Bledsoe within his own division.
Yeah, always maximize the
live
value.
to tell about it. Get what you can.
Spite is not a good thing in professional sports.
And maybe Ben Simmons in Houston would have been better. I love your idea of Dame Lillard for Ben Simmons. We know Lillard's a better player, but he's also older. He's smaller, but could you picture a Dame Lillard Embiid combo in Philadelphia? Look out. Maybe Ben Simmons goes to Portland, more mellow franchise, right? More mellow market. And, maybe he flourishes there with a bunch of shooters around him.
And but I said this last night. I don't think Portland would do it now. He's not a complete player. You're not getting there was a point in time where Ben Simmons was maybe one of the most desirable players in the NBA right after he came out of the draft and stuff like that. But he hasn't demonstrably improved his game. So I said this last night, and I said this, I think 2 days ago, Sap, I was saying Lillard for Simmons, that makes sense. But now after this playoff performance, Portland's going to laugh at that and said, why would we do that?
We need more.
Throw in a couple first-round picks.
And a player maybe, right? Maybe Maxey or
someone
kind of
young with potential. That's not an even trade at this point.
No, it's not at all. This is frustrating to watch. So a lot of the blame goes to Ben Simmons, but you also have to give some of the blame, and a big part of it, to Doc Rivers. And look, I love Doc Rivers. When he was playing with Atlanta, he was the go-to guy. My job in the 80s was covering the Celtics, and my job when ESPN would set up a second crew was to go into the losers' locker room because the anchors wanted to go hang out with the winning team. I get that. So I can't tell you how many times I had to go into the Hawks or the Bucks or the 76ers or the Pistons locker rooms and deal with guys who just lost a tough game to the Celtics. Doc Rivers was a peach to deal with. Loved him as a coach. I think Doc Rivers could run for the U.S. Senate. I'd help him on his campaign. Right now, it seems like he's lost it as a coach at some point. Look at his record. And again, these aren't made up. These are actual facts. I tweeted this out earlier in the day at John Sapp 25. 3 times in his career as a head coach, he's lost 3 games to 1 leads in series. He did it with Orlando back in the mid-2000s. He did it twice with the L.A. Clippers. He's also lost 3 series when he led 3 games to 2, all 3 times with the Celtics. 2009 against Orlando, 2010 against the Lakers, 2012 against Miami. 6 times he's had a 3-1 or 3-2 lead in a series, and he's managed to lose those series. He's also, Jet, in the last 15 years, lost 11 playoff games when his team led by 15 or more points. That's unfathomable, and including the last 2 games. This series should be over.
It's
Philadelphia should have wrapped this up in 5 games. This shouldn't even be going to a game 6, and yet they're down 3 games to 2. And a lot of that's on Doc Rivers. He didn't act quick enough to make changes. Atlanta was in a 15-2 run last night, late 3rd, early 4th. He kept his bench in. Like Embiid was on the bench as if Doc figured game's over, my bench will take care of business, and they didn't.
Yeah, I mean, the final quarter was 40-19. I mean, Atlanta just
insane.
Just took it to him. Yeah, it's obviously it's enough of a trend where it's an actual thing with Doc Rivers and not just he's gotten unlucky. It's happened enough where you can certainly point the finger. It's a weird thing to have as a coach in the NBA where you have chances to make it up. It's not football where this guy can't get over the hump and win the big game. Right. You have
Marty Schottenheimer
losing multiple games.
Right,
it was Andy Reid for a while.
It was Andy Reid for a while. Marty Schottenheimer is probably the best coach in NFL history that never made it to the Super Bowl, right? And look, Doc's made it to 2 finals, won one, lost another. But, he's had some pretty great players that he's had, whether Garnett, Pierce, Ray Allen, Rondo in Boston. He goes to the Clippers. He gets Chris Paul. Blake Griffin, I don't think, is a great player. But then he's got Kawhi and Paul George, and he loses a 3-1 lead over Denver last year. They changed coaches with the Clippers this year, and they come back from 2 games to none down against Dallas to win that series. And I know we're going to talk about the surprising Clippers win last night over Utah. They're in control of that series up 3-2 with Kawhi missing games 5, 6, possibly 7, and probably the rest of the postseason, right? Kawhi's done for the year, and Ty Lue's got his team closer to the conference championship than Doc Rivers got them last year. So, those are just facts. And again, I love Doc Rivers. I really do. He's one of my favorite players to cover. Love him as a coach here. Again, I'd love to see him run for the U.S. Senate. I would campaign for him. I'd vote for him. I just got a funny feeling a lot of Philadelphia 76ers would like to see him run for the Senate as well, like now.
Yeah, it's whatever's going on in Philadelphia, between Doc Rivers and clearly I think this is showing the Ben Simmons and Embiid pairing it doesn't work because he just doesn't take enough of a scoring burden off of Embiid.
Yeah.
And so Embiid gets fatigued at the end of the games. He can't hit his free throws. He hasn't shown the willingness or ability to get better. I think it's time to move on. I really do. We haven't given the Hawks enough credit so far, Sap. We've just been talking about the sort of the shortcomings of the 76ers, but the Hawks deserve a lot of credit too. Obviously, the story is Trae Young, who just continues to be phenomenal in the postseason. One of the single best players in the postseason period. He had
Without
39
question.
last night, 17 of 19 from the free throw line, 10 of 23 from the floor, only 7 assists, which is a little low for him. But he just scored a boatload, and he's big shot maker now. He's becoming a guy that you can sort of rely on at the end of games, and his team really follows suit. He's the smallest guy in the court for his team, but as he goes, they go, which is the mark of a star player.
He's reminding me, and I'm not going to put him in this class yet, but he's got a little bit of Iverson in him, and he's got a little bit of Isaiah Thomas in him, right? I mean, Iverson, and the fact that Iverson never, turned down a shot. Like, he never saw a shot he didn't like. This kid is impervious to pressure. I think he's a better passer than Allen Iverson. I think he's a better pure shooter than Iverson. Iverson, a better athlete. Iverson, just a force of nature, right? I mean, Iverson was cut the same way that Jordan and Kobe were cut, like just maniacal, driven, determined guys.
He was in the building last night.
Yeah, which, makes it even sadder because Dr. J was in the building.
Yeah,
right?
both of them were.
Both of them were there. The two greatest living 76ers were in the building, and Philly was up 26 and they couldn't finish it. And I'm rooting for Philadelphia. I really am, because I think they could give Brooklyn a series if they're all in. And also, it's a great basketball market. I've always been a fan of Ben Simmons. I wish I had the opportunity to just get into that kid's head, because he's got so much talent. I just think he needs confidence, direction, whatever the case may be. I love Embiid. Who doesn't? Like I said, I love Doc. But if I'm going to assign blame here, it's going to be 10% for Embiid, because I still want to see him in the low block late in the game. He's unstoppable down there. Tobias Harris should get 20% of the blame, because he's still a $37 million a year player. He should be better than what he was last night. 30% of the blame goes to Doc Rivers, because he is the coach of this team. Ben Simmons gets 40% of the blame, because he absolutely sucked, especially when they need him. You cannot go 4 for 14 from the free throw line. That's Wilt Chamberlain would do better than that. I mean, that's 28%. That is terrible.
No, it's terrible. Anybody else on the Hawks stick out to you, Sap, or is it just the Trae Young show?
Lou Williams was incredible in the fourth quarter. He really was. And remember at the trade deadline when they acquired Lou Williams for Rondo, and I'm like, yeah, this is a steal for the Clippers, because Rondo is a championship caliber player. Lou Williams is not, and Lou Williams is a guy who seemed like he quit on the Clippers. That guy's instant offense. Man, he's the one who kind of got them back into it in the fourth quarter when both teams went to their benches. Lou Williams was big. Danilo Gallinari's had a really nice postseason. And John Collins, a player I think we both would like to see on the Celtics at some point, because he's another guy who just comes out there with an attitude. I like this team. They're coming with an attitude. They're playing well on the road. That's the amazing thing about Trae Young, Jed. He's had 5 30-point plus games on the road this year in the postseason at Madison Square Garden and in Philadelphia, two, tough places to play. He's been the villain and very comfortable with it, kind of like Reggie Miller was in the 90s going to Madison Square Garden. When you see a player like that, you got to love it. And they are playing with a chip on their shoulder, the Atlanta Hawks are, because you could hear after the game, Trae Young was like, well, we didn't have any first, second, or third all NBA players, or we don't have any first, second, or third all NBA defensive players, or sixth man of the year, or anything like that. We're just a team. And this kid he's backing it up. He's backing it up.
Yeah, I mean, he deserves a ton of credit. And, there's always going to be the comparisons with him and Luka Doncic, because they were traded for each other on draft day. And I think somebody, I don't know if it was Perkins or somebody in the media, made a good point and said, if Doncic had, rallied his team to be above the 1 seed right now, it would be the talk of the NBA. Holy crap, look at this guy. And Trae Young's done that, just that.
He's done
and he should be getting a ton of credit and really emerging as one of the bright young star players of this league.
Without question. And again, he'll be like one of the most popular players in the league because there's a lot of Steph Curry in his game. Steph is more the good cop, where Trae Young's comfortable being the bad cop.
But people like that.
People like that. So kids are going to love him. I can just see now all the kids that they love Steph Curry. He's the most popular player in the league among the young kids, and especially among girls. Girls love Steph Curry because they think they can go out and play like him in women's basketball. Not that anyone can shoot like that, but, you could kind of try to recreate that. You're not going to recreate Kevin Durant or LeBron James. They're unicorns. But I think Trae Young is on the precipice of being one of the most popular players in the league. And I think that the two players fit where they ended up, right? Trae Young in Atlanta.
Perfect.
Luka in Dallas. And I think that Trae has a better supporting cast right now than Luka has because, his wingman is Kristaps Porzingis, who sucks. I mean, Danilo Gallinari is probably the 4th or 5th best player on Atlanta. I would take him over Kristaps Porzingis right now because he kind of knows his role and goes ahead and does it. John Collins is a nice player. Clint Capella, good defender. And look, Lou Williams, he was huge last night. That's where having those veterans coming off the bench in big games is a plus, and that's what the Hawks got last night. So they're close to getting to the Eastern Conference Finals. I was texting with my nephew last night. He's like, wouldn't it be funny if Atlanta wins the title because every other team has injuries and all sorts of crazy things happening? Chris Paul's going in COVID protocol. Kawhi's out for the year. Maybe Durant's going to have to do this on his own in Brooklyn. And here come the Atlanta Hawks out of nowhere. Hey, why not? The Tampa Bay Bucks won the Super Bowl, right? The Tampa Bay Lightning won the Stanley Cup. Who knows? Maybe it's one of those years where teams that never really did much do a lot.
Yeah, maybe. But Trae Young's going to get, I can tell you, a really massive signature shoe deal out of this. And he's going to get a big push from both the NBA and I think he's with Nike. I'm not positive. But he's going to be one of the most popular players. The Hawks jerseys are kind of cool. I like, the black and the red and the yellow. So yeah, he's gonna emerge as one of the most popular players in the league because of this postseason.
Don't change your hair, Trae. Keep your hair the way it is. It's unique. It's kind of
like Anthony Davis with the eyebrows.
Yeah, don't change. That's who you are. Like Durant's got the bald spot. That's fine. Leave it alone.
He's making himself a lot of money with endorsements in this postseason. So good for Trae Young.
A lot.
Let's go to the other game last night, Sap, which was also a surprise because we had this wrong. Utah, who lost 5 games at home in the regular season, the first game of the postseason at home because Donovan Mitchell didn't play, and then the Clippers come into this one with no Kawhi. So we said, oh yeah, Utah, no problem, they should win this game. Not so fast. Playoff P, Paul George has a remarkable game. The guy who I said I didn't trust as the second best player on the team, Marcus Morris, he also has a terrific game, and the Clippers win that one 119-111 to take a 3-2 lead over the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, I mean, Paul George was amazing last night. And we talked about Paul George a couple shows ago, that this is a guy, he's kind of maddening because if you look at his skill set, he should be a top 5 player in the league, right? Like, what doesn't he do well? He can score from all 3 levels. He's an excellent passer. Last night, he had 16 rebounds. We know he's an elite defender. I mean, he came back from a horrific injury 7 years ago when he shattered his leg and came back a year later and was back to being an all-star. He's got all of the ability to be one of the greatest players in the league. Doesn't have self-confidence. We know he had issues in the bubble last year. He calls himself playoff P, and now the joke was playoff P as in PEE, pandemic P, that he didn't perform in the bubble last year. He's stepping up, and it wasn't just last night. He's been playing really well in the postseason. Now it's his team with Kawhi out for the rest of the postseason. He was magnificent last night, Jet. He was taking the ball to the basket aggressively against Rudy Gobert. He was hitting shots from the outside. He was doing what he does on defense, went out and got 16 rebounds. Like I said, this is a guy who should be one of the best players in the league. And at times he's kind of touched that. Don't forget, 2 years ago, he was 3rd in MVP voting, but then he followed that up with a 5-point performance in a clinching game in the postseason when the OKC Thunder lost to the Portland Trailblazers
in the playoffs.
It's like really stinkers. I mean, guys can have off games in the playoffs. Like we're talking about Giannis the other night having an off game. He still was 30-10, right? I mean, it's not like he had a horrible game, just didn't come up big at the end. good for Paul George. He's a sensational player, and they stepped up. Marcus Morris stepped up. Utah was kind of weird, Jet, because they hit 17 3-pointers in the first half, and yet they were only up 5 points. At that point, you're like, 17 3-pointers and a half. I think the record is 29 for the game. They're on pace to shatter the record, and they're only up 5 points. And then the Clippers continued playing well. I wonder if Utah being so successful from three and just relying on the three in the first half, it kind of got Donovan Mitchell out of his rhythm. Because of all those guys on Utah, he's a good, not a great three-point shooter. He's more of a slasher. It didn't seem like he was engaged like he normally is, so that in the second half when they went to him, he just wasn't up to speed yet. We've watched football for a million years. There was a game the Patriots played against the Denver Broncos where they just essentially told Peyton Manning, we'll let you run down the field. We're not going to let you beat us throwing the football. Manning checked down to the run. The Broncos had like 250 yards.
No time Moreno rushing, had a 200-yard rushing game.
Huge game. And then when it was time for Peyton Manning to try to amp it up, he just wasn't able to because you're not in rhythm. And it's almost felt like that with Donovan Mitchell last night. Disappointing night for Utah. Gobert was just so-so. No blocks, 10 rebounds. He's got to be better than that. That was a strange game, though. I mean, there were like back-to-back strange games last night that when you woke up this morning to think about them, you're like, no one expected that last night.
Yeah,
and that's what's made the playoffs more intriguing now. Last night was probably the most intriguing night of the playoffs, followed by the night before with Milwaukee choking against the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, we've had three sort of unpredictable results in a row. The Jazz, whose calling card all year long has been defense, they weren't great defensively last night. Obviously, giving up 119 points isn't ideal. Paul George sort of just did whatever he wanted on the court. They had no answer for him. And then the secondary players stepped up. You mentioned Marcus Morris. Reggie Jackson was terrific. So those guys filled in admirably for no Kawhi Leonard. They were able to, to score on a team that's supposed to be the best defensive team in basketball. So obviously we've said this, Sap. Donovan Mitchell's not at 100%, so you can kind of put that in the equation. They don't have Mike Conley, but still, I think most people were expecting the Jazz to be able to win this series and especially win the game at home. And now it looks like it's really the Clippers to lose. They're going to have two cracks at it. And the Jazz just sort of look almost out of sorts. They need Conley back desperately because with Mitchell being what he is, he needs more of the scoring pressure to take off of him. Gobert's not really a scorer. The rest of the guys are kind of streaky. Clarkson was 5 of 12 last night. He had 15 points. That's fine, but still not great. Ingles, 12 points. He's a streaky guy. Bogdanovich at 32. He was really good, but you can't count on that every game. So they need to be at full strength. So if Conley is even at, 60, 70%, they need to play him in this Olympic because otherwise their season's over.
Yeah, I mean, he'll give them some offense, but, I think if you're Utah, you would take the trade 7 days a week, Mike Conley for Kawhi Leonard, because the Clippers are without Kawhi Leonard. Now, is Marcus Morris and Reggie Jackson going to do what they did last night again? I wouldn't count on it. So I could see this thing going 7 games. Look, the Clippers have shown they can win on the road, right? They won 3 games in Dallas. They looked out of it in that series. They looked out of it in this series, and they've come back to win 3 straight. Do I count on Paul George doing what he did last night again? Probably not. I mean, he's not at the level of Kevin Durant, where I would expect Durant to do a lot of the same things he did in Game 5 and Game 6. And if he does, I wouldn't be surprised. Paul George is obviously level or 2 below Kevin Durant, but he's a sensational player. Speaks as highly about how great Durant is when Paul George isn't even in his neighborhood. But I think the series is going to go 7. I get the feeling that that's going to happen. Just because I think that someone on Utah will step up. I would expect Donovan Mitchell to step up big in Game 6, and I think he'll be more aggressive, and maybe they'll take the ball to the basket more. Again, the Clippers can't defend the rim. They really can't. Brooklyn and the Clippers, who may meet in the finals for all we know, neither can really defend the rim, so I don't know why teams don't take it to there. Again, I know the league is 3-point happy, but still take it to the rim. You get people in foul trouble. You get to the free throw line. You control pace, those types of things. I think they'll be more aggressive on Friday and try to force it to Game 7.
Either way, the Western Conference Finals is going to be weird because we don't know what the status of Chris Paul is going to be. Right. And then obviously it doesn't seem like there's going to be Kawhi Leonard should the Clippers advance. And if the Jazz advance, You got, Donovan Mitchell sort of hobbled. Mike Conley, I don't know if he's going to play. Again, that's why we're going to talk about this Brooklyn game in a second. That's why that game 5 was so important for Milwaukee and just such a wasted opportunity, because whoever comes out of the West, it seems like they're just going to be limping to the finals and sort of fodder for the team that wins the East.
Well, and Brooklyn could be limping into the finals as well. I mean, Harden, look, that hamstring is going to hinder him for the rest of the playoffs. Now, is he going to play as poorly or as insignificantly as he did the other night? No, he'll probably get better as the playoffs
see how he
continue
could.
on. Yeah, I mean, he was just there as a decoy. Obviously, Milwaukee didn't take advantage of that. When they had the basketball, they didn't hunt him out enough. I mean, you got Giannis taking fadeaway jump shots, one-on-one coverage by James Harden. I mean, that's just, again, Giannis doesn't have a great feel for the game. So Brooklyn's going to limp into this finals if they get there. I mean, we don't know about Kyrie's ankle injury. That's going to be obviously a concern. Look, this could set up for the Atlanta Hawks, as strange as that sounds, because right now they're playing with house money, right? They're the one team that no one expected to be here. Although I did think they would beat the Knicks, but no one expected them to be up 3-2 over Philadelphia.
Or beat the Knicks in 5. I don't think anybody
beat the Knicks in 5. And they're beating Philadelphia with Embiid putting up big numbers. I mean, It's not like if Embiid missed 1 or 2 games, you could say, okay, I could see Atlanta winning that series. Embiid's been out there putting up huge numbers. He didn't play well in the fourth quarter last night, didn't play well in the second half of game 4. If he had, the series would have been over. But again, if Ben Simmons hit some free throws and Tobias Harris showed up and Doc Rivers, paid attention for more than 30 seconds, this series should have been over. I mean, I know we think Milwaukee's scratching their head about losing game 5. How do you think Philadelphia feels right now that they have to win back-to-back games over Atlanta just to win the series when they should have already wrapped it up? I put out a Twitter poll at John Sapp 25. Who choked more, the Bucks the other night or the Sixers last night? I don't even think it's close. It's the Sixers. A 26-point lead in the second half at home against Atlanta is different than losing a 17-point lead on the road against Brooklyn. I respect Atlanta, but Brooklyn has Kevin Durant.
I look at
was a massive choke job.
Totally. I don't disagree with you there. I just look at it in a one-game vacuum. Yeah, definitely Philadelphia. But in terms of the bigger picture, I think Milwaukee had a chance to really put a vice grip on trying to win the championship. I don't think Philadelphia is going to win the championship this year, but Milwaukee pissed it away. That's why, and I'm going to go on a quick Celtics thing here, Sep. I think all of this stuff that we're talking about is why this season, again, was so frustrating for Celtics fans. They just put a competent team out on the court. Look how things can open up in the playoffs.
Sure.
But you had basically Jaylen Brown who got hurt, and then Jason Tatum trying to do everything by himself. So the Celtics, had they had a decent roster this year, could have legitimately made a run at a title because things have opened up in the playoffs. But the negligence of the front office, you had a team that should have been so much better than they were, but you let it get to such a bad point. Like, Sap, if they had the roster they had 2 years ago, this year in the playoffs, they would be the finals favorite.
Yeah, well, I mean, I still think Brooklyn would be the favorite in the East. I mean, provided if Kyrie and Harden were healthy
right
Kevin
now,
Durant.
if we're saying that Brooklyn is what they are, with things opening up.
And as great as that roster was, and again, Marcus Morris was your 8th best player on that roster. He's now the 2nd best player on the Clippers, who may go to the Western Conference Finals. Shows you how deep that roster was. Yeah, that team underachieved incredibly. It's kind of ironic that the best roster the Celtics have had since since Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen left happened to be that year, and they lost in the second round to Milwaukee. Didn't make the conference finals, which they did in 3 other years with lesser rosters. That's the way it works sometimes. Yeah, look, if they had had a better roster this year, they wouldn't have been the 7th seed. They wouldn't have had to play Brooklyn to, play in the first round. They could have avoided Brooklyn for at least a round. Maybe they're playing Miami or Atlanta or the Knicks. And I don't know if a better roster would have beaten Atlanta, because Atlanta seems to be on a roll. But I get your point that Milwaukee and Philadelphia is as good as they are, and how unbeatable we thought they were going to be if they had played the Celtics. The Celtics could have certainly beat those teams, because those teams implode, right? Because here's the problem. Milwaukee's best player does not have a natural feel for the game, and he's awful at the free throw line. Philadelphia's 2nd best player has a great feel for the game. He's worse at the free throw line. And Philadelphia's best player seems to be effective for 3 quarters, but not 4. So those teams are flawed. The Celtics could have at least been competitive with those teams in a 7-game series, provided Jaylen Brown was healthy and Danny Ainge made the right moves to support Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Absolutely. How do you think I feel for the Lakers, though, with LeBron? If they could have somehow got by Phoenix, which I think they could have if Anthony Davis doesn't get hurt in Game 4, they would have certainly beaten Denver. They would have been sitting right now waiting for a beat-up Clippers team in the Western Conference Finals or a somewhat hobbled, not confident Utah Jazz team.
Yeah, no,
I
it
think
would
the
open up great for them.
Lakers would have been sitting there waiting now as the favorites to win the West. And you know what? We probably would have had that Lakers Brooklyn Nets finals that you feared, and I kind of wanted to, put to rest that Durant's better than LeBron. But again, it opened up for so many teams this year. That's why the funniest thing would be the Atlanta Hawks winning it. That would just be, that would be so hilarious. And who knows? Maybe Trae Young is Dwayne Wade circa 2006, right? A young guy that just had a great postseason, was able to crack through quickly in his career.
Yeah, well, we'll see. It's been an odd postseason, to say the least. And so we'll get into this game, Sap, tonight between the Nets and the Bucks. Obviously, as we know, the Nets took a 3-2 series lead. This game is in Milwaukee tonight at 8:30 Eastern. Harden is going to play. Kyrie Irving is not going to play. Sap, the spread on this is 5.5 favoring Milwaukee. How do you see it playing out?
Well, Zigzag says take Milwaukee, but Zigzag said take Philadelphia and Utah last night. That didn't work out too well. I think Milwaukee's going to win tonight. I think some of their secondary players are going to shoot lights out, whether it be Pat Connaughton or, I don't call Drew Holiday a secondary player. He's got to play better than he did in Game 5. I think Giannis is going to go nuts tonight, and Harden's going to be limited with that hamstring. And look, it could be a case where Milwaukee just shows up and literally deer in headlights, no pun intended, because they had their opportunity in Game 5. Can they recover from that? I don't think they're the mentally toughest team, but I still think they'll come through in this game and force Game 7. I think some of their secondary players will come up fairly big tonight. Again, it comes down with Milwaukee, how they shoot from 3. That's really all it comes down to, how they shoot from 3 and how they defend the 3. The only problem for Milwaukee is some of the secondary guys for Brooklyn have been god-awful the last 2 or 3 games. Is that going to last for the rest of this series?
Right, yeah. Joe Harris hasn't shot the ball well. Eventually,
horrible.
Water will find its level with him.
He's too good a shooter to be at like 22% the last 3 games, right? Is that going to continue? I mean, Durant, is he going to replicate what he did the other night? Probably not, but you know what? His average game isn't too far off from there. Yeah, I mean, if he goes for 38, 12, and 8 tonight, is that going to be a surprise? No. He's that good. So this is going to be a tough spot for Milwaukee, but I think they'll win it. Look, I hope the 3 remaining series go 7 games. Game 7 in basketball is fantastic. Generally favors the home team. We understand that. Generally, the home team is the better team. In this case, I think that could be the case because they may also be the healthier team. But it's going to be a tough one for Milwaukee tonight. The only problem is, don't you start to lose confidence that no lead is safe? Like if they're up 17 in the third quarter again, you're like, okay, we were here just 2 nights ago and it didn't end well.
No, I told you this the other day. I gave basically my prediction. I think Milwaukee is they're toast. I think that they had their chance. They pissed it away. And I don't think they win tonight. I think they know exactly the opportunity that they had. And they essentially let, one guy beat them, and then sort of the corpse of Jeff Green hit 7 threes. I just think that they can't get over it. Like you said, I don't believe they're the mentally toughest team. They've had heartbreak in the postseason before. I think that they don't know how to win these games. No. I just haven't seen that they have the ability to win big games. When have they won a big game, Sap? I know
probably 1971 was the last time they won a championship. So everything since then has been a disappointment.
I think
as an organization
tonight. I really do.
Yeah.
And it's going to be disappointing for NBA fans outside of Brooklyn, and it's going to be disappointing for the home fans in Milwaukee. But I think that they lose, and Brooklyn gets a little bit of a rest, maybe at least a day or 2 to try to get Kyrie right and Harden a little healthier, which just plays more to their advantage. I mean, Milwaukee could do the league a big favor by forcing Brooklyn to play a Game 7. I just don't think that they're going to.
Yeah, I mean, because obviously if Atlanta goes Game 7, then Brooklyn would get some extra rest if they wrap it up tonight. It's a problem for Milwaukee because, again, their best player does not have a natural feel for the game, and he also is a disaster at the free throw line. So what do? Take him off the court in the final few minutes? You can't do that.
And I also think, Budenholzer knows his job is in line, and I don't think that you coach particularly well when you're worried about your livelihood. So I don't think that you can count on him to come up with a great strategy in this game. I don't know that Giannis is going to check Durant because he didn't at all in the last game. And it's not like Middleton and Holiday were that bad in the last game, and they still lost. So I think they look at we played a pretty good game, but we lost because of two guys, mostly Kevin Durant. And in the game that we had the best opportunity for this franchise since the Oscar Robertson days to win a championship. So I think that they are emotionally shot, and I don't think they're going to win this game. You had the Bucks in 7 initially, or in 6?
Yeah, I did. I had them in 7 initially. I thought their defense was going to be the difference in this series. And there's part of me and there's part of you rooting against Brooklyn.
Oh, absolutely.
For different reasons. You hate Kyrie Irving. That's the number one reason you're rooting against Brooklyn. And I'm such a big LeBron guy that the two teams I don't want to see win the championship are either Brooklyn or the Clippers. And now if the Clippers win it, it's going to be an accomplishment by Paul George. I can live with that.
If Kawhi's out for the playoffs, they're not winning the championship.
I don't think so, unless Paul George just does what he did last night, another 9 times, which I wouldn't count on. Obviously, if Durant wins a championship, he'll have 3, most likely 3 finals MVPs. And then the discussion is who's the best player in the world right now? Is it Durant or LeBron? I don't think Durant will ever surpass LeBron historically. I just don't think he can because he just can't do as much. I think
it's because of the way he's won his titles. No one's going to put him over LeBron because of
LeBron's title in Cleveland, when he came back from 3 games to 1 down against Golden State, that kind of feels like 2 titles. Like they're not all titles are the same. Like I know people are going to knock his title last year with the Lakers, but the Lakers have been dog shit for 8 years since even before Kobe retired. Really they were of no relevance. I mean, that's why when may he rest in peace. And Kobe was an all-time great. I think he's the 9th greatest player in the history of the sport. And of course, Laker fans go, "What are you, nuts? That's insane." I go, "He's the 9th greatest player in the history of the sport." I think only 8 guys were better. That's pretty impressive. But Kobe couldn't drag bad teams the way LeBron could drag bad teams. The other night we saw Kevin Durant drag a pretty bad team to a huge win in the postseason. Now, can he do it series after series like LeBron did in 2007, 2015, 2018? Not likely. But Durant right now, in terms of legacy, he can crack the top 10 all time on my list. I could see him supplanting Oscar Robertson as my 10th greatest player of all time. If he wins a title this year and he's close to what he was the other night for another month, he could move up above the great centers of like Moses Malone and Olajuwon and Shaq and Elgin Baylor and West, the 2 great Lakers. Yeah, he could move up to like number 10 on my list. That's how good this guy is. Because again, if I'm saying that he is the greatest, most varied offensive player we've ever seen, then by default, he's going to end up being a top 10 player.
Yeah, and all things being equal, Sap, and I'm not, I'm not a huge LeBron guy. I don't love him. I acknowledge how great he is as a player. I do think he's the 2nd greatest player of all time. I think that you could make a strong case that Durant's team, when healthy, again, all things being equal, this Nets team when healthy, and those Warriors teams when healthy are better than any team LeBron's ever played on.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, no, he's played with.
It was a legitimate big 3, Bosh, Wade, and LeBron, and Bosh, Kyrie, and Love. But Durant, Kyrie, and Harden, and Durant, Steph, Draymond, Clay, those teams are better than any team LeBron's been on. Both this Nets team and those Warriors teams.
Yeah, because let's not forget, when he went to Miami, Wade was still great, but he wasn't quite in his prime. Because Wade, he was still great.
I think the first year or 2, he was close to in his prime.
But it was kind of a clunky fit, Remember the first year, they got to the finals, lost to Dallas. It was kind of an odd fit because they play somewhat similar, so it took a little while for them to fit. Bosh, look, I think Klay Thompson historically will go down as a better player than Bosh. I think Kyrie Irving's certainly more talented. Well, here's the point, Jet. In Cleveland, Kyrie Irving was clearly the number 2 guy, right?
Yeah.
In Brooklyn, he's clearly the number 3 guy.
Right, there's the difference right there. That's pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, it's like I always say that Jordan.
Well, he doesn't think so. He thinks he's the best player.
He still thinks he's the best player. But it's like people would say, well, Jordan beat Utah. I said, okay, LeBron had to face a Golden State team that Durant's better than Karl Malone. Steph Curry's better than John Stockton.
Yep.
Imagine if you put the equivalent of Klay Thompson on that Utah team, which would have been maybe Clyde Drexler.
Yep. He was the
Jeff
Hornacek of that team.
Right. I mean, he's miles better. So if in that era, if you had Clyde Drexler on Utah with Karl Malone and John Stockton, you think Jordan was beating that team? If he did, then I give up the argument who the greatest player is. We don't know that because that's, hypothetical. But yeah, no, I mean, Durant's played with better teammates, and Durant's also an easier fit than LeBron. I mean, and I'll say that LeBron's not
a shooter.
He's a shooter. He's like Durant reminds me of the old guy that has a very simple life, right? Like there's nothing complicated. The kids are grown up. He's got grandkids he can play with. He's retired. He's got a nice pension. He goes golf. He's got like a simple game. Whereas LeBron, there's a lot of things going on. I think LeBron tougher to play with than Durant. I'll say that.
That's why the 08 Celtics fit together so well, too, because it wasn't a clunky offense. Nobody needed to be in the same space. Ray Allen was just going to run off screens and shoot. Pierce was the slasher. Garnett was the post player and had a mid-range game. No one was in the way of each other.
No, it was perfect. That's why now you watch Philly, it almost seems like Simmons and Embiid just don't fit. Like Simmons likes to drive to the basket. He has no offensive ability, you're right. And then you got Tobias Harris, maybe the luckiest man in the United States, makes $37 million a year. He's set for life, and no one's talking about him today, how much he sucked last night, because we're all dumping on Ben Simmons and Doc Rivers and a little bit on Joel Embiid. But Tobias Harris was a huge reason that Philadelphia choked last night. He was a non-factor.
Yeah, no, it's fair to dump on him. So you have the Bucks making it to a game 7. I have the Nets, really, really just trouncing the dreams of all NBA fans tonight. And winning in Milwaukee. Sap, before we wrap up, a couple of interesting stories in the NBA regarding 2 young star players, both being unhappy in their current situations. Luka Doncic not happy that the Mavericks have fired, because they did fire him, Donnie Nelson, regardless of what they want to call it. He was there for 20 years. He didn't want to leave, and the Mavericks did. That is a firing in my book.
Yeah, that qualifies as a firing. Yeah.
And Zion Williamson's family apparently unhappy with the goings-on in New Orleans. Not unhappy that they got rid of Stan Van Gundy. I think unhappy that they hired Stan Van Gundy in the first place, and not thinking that they've put enough around Zion Williamson. Granted, the guy hasn't really stayed on the court for all that long, too, so I don't know what they could be pissed about. The thing is, it's interesting because they're 2 of the brightest young stars in the league. I mean, Luka Doncic, you could already make an argument, is probably a top 5 player. Zion Williamson seems like he's well on his way. People are making too big of a deal about this because neither one has really any sort of mechanism to get out of their situation. So I look at it as kind of much ado about nothing because contractually, they're going nowhere.
Yeah, it's nearly impossible, right? Unless they don't accept the second contract. And at that point,
then they become restricted
free agents. So they're not going anywhere. It's generally 7 years before you can move on.
Right.
Am I being accurate with that? You're more
Anthony Davis got out about as quick as you can get out for being a star player, which was about 7 years.
And Kyrie kind of did too, but Kyrie did it in a different fashion because he still had 2 years left on his contract and said, I'm going to go get a knee operation or whatever. I'm not going to play. So at that point, they had to trade him. So I think it's 7 years and then you can move on. So Luka still would have 4 years left in Dallas and Zion would have 5 years left in New Orleans unless they become so unhappy that the teams have to trade them. And look, Doncic has played 3 years in the league. He's already really elevated himself. Like you said, close to being a top 5 player. He's a top 5 talent. He needs to just accomplish team accomplishments, individual accomplishments. He's been first team All-NBA twice. He was the favorite going into this year to be league MVP. He's been wildly successful in the playoffs, although he's lost both series. At least he's gotten to the playoffs. Zion hasn't gotten to the playoffs and hasn't been durable. So he's got to, get better on his own. I think Zion was upset that they traded JJ Redick.
Yeah, they share an agent, and Redick was upset. It was not that they traded him, but they said they were going to trade him to an East Coast team because that's where his family lives, and they traded him to the Mavericks. Right. And he was unhappy about that. He felt like they lied to him. So I think that soured him a little bit on the management side of things. But again, he can be as unhappy as he wants, but they're not trading him. The difference with the Kyrie situation was he wasn't even the best player on the team. LeBron was still there when they traded him. And so I think they felt comfortable saying, hey, we can trade this guy, throw a couple other guys with LeBron, still have a good chance of winning a championship. I'd rather get rid of this guy who's a sad sack. Zion and Luka are far and away the best players on their respective teams. They're not trading them. Even if they say, I'm upset, I'm going to get a surgery, they're not moving on from them, especially New Orleans, who has no mechanism to get free agents to recruit there. I mean, Dallas presumably does because it's a big city. Not that they really ever have, but neither one is going to trade those guys. It's not going to happen.
No, I mean, the key is New Orleans is going to hire a new head coach. So you're going to need to bring in Zion and maybe some members of the family and work with them to pick the next head coach. I know that sounds crazy, but you know what, guys? That's 2021 NBA. That's just the reality of it. As far as Dallas, now that Donnie Nelson is gone as general manager, who was close with Luka Doncic, is Rick Carlisle going to get fired? If Luka doesn't want him as his coach, that's probably going to happen. And maybe they need to go in a different direction as head coach. I'll tell you what, if Rick Carlisle's gone, then Dallas becomes the most appealing coaching vacancy in the NBA because you have
sure.
Luka Doncic and you've got an owner that will spend money. And it is a city I think you can recruit free agents. It's no state income tax. Dallas is a big market, although you're never going to be the team in the city because they've got the Cowboys, but that's okay. The Celtics are never going to be the team in this city right now because you still have the Patriots and the Red Sox have an incredible following as well. They're going to remain. They just have to appease these two young players and, put the right pieces around them, maybe change the coach in Dallas, get the right coach in New Orleans. They had Monty Williams, right, years ago, and they moved on from him, and now he's doing wonders in Phoenix. That's the kind of coach I want. That's why I'm rooting for the Celtics to go with either Chauncey Billups or Sam Cassell. And there are reports now that Cassell may be the leading contender for that coaching position with Boston, which I think would be a great move. Chauncey Billups could probably name where he's going to coach. It could be Portland. Maybe it's New Orleans. Maybe New Orleans reaches out and offers him the position. So that's going to be a big key is what they do with their coaching positions going forward. But this is the NBA now, and I'm fine with it. These are the guys who run the league, right? I mean, the players run the league. And if Luka's unhappy, if you're Mark Cuban, you better address it. If Zion's unhappy, ownership in New Orleans had better address it because you don't find these players every year in the draft. These are, once, twice in a decade type talents. You've got them. You've got to make the best of them.
Yeah, and I think fortunately for both Dallas and New Orleans, because of the way the contracts are structured in the NBA, they have time to make them happy by putting on, what will make them the most happy is, giving them more help on the court.
Sure.
And I thought that the Pelicans had more than enough talent to be able to make the playoffs. So, I don't think that they've done a bad job building that team. I really don't think that they've made any real errors in how they've constructed it. It was Stan Van Gundy not being the right fit. So that was a mistake. And then, a lot of that falls on the players too. And so Zion should take some blame for not being able to elevate his team to at least the playoffs, because that roster was certainly good enough. It was better than Memphis's roster and better than some of the other teams.
Better than Dallas's roster. I mean,
better than Dallas's roster. I agree.
Brandon Ingram would be the second best player on Dallas, right? He'd be the second best player on Memphis.
Lonzo Ball might be the second best player on Dallas.
And there's a rumor out there, would the Celtics be interested in Lonzo Ball? I think he'd fit with Tatum and Brown. Now, if you don't have to, I think he'd be a perfect fit for them. I think Lonzo Ball can be a better version of Marcus Smart. Maybe not quite the defender, but he's a really good defender.
He'd be a good fit on any
team.
Great
passer. I think he as your fourth player, right? Like not as your
he's
second
just too
player.
hyped coming out of college. That was the problem. He's a very, very good point guard. He's like I think he could be a little bit better than Ricky Rubio, which is Ricky Rubio's had like a 12-year NBA career and been a very good starting point guard. Nothing wrong with that.
No, just happened to be drafted ahead of Steph Curry.
Yeah, and
Johnny Flynn. Minnesota had two chances to take Steph Curry. They took Ricky Rubio and Johnny Flynn instead of Steph Curry.
It's Minnesota.
Minnesota,
man. What do you expect?
But you're right. Those two guys are going to stay where they are, and I think it's good for the league because they're intriguing markets. New Orleans is a good sports city. You would think New Orleans could recruit free agents. It's a great city.
No one cares about the team there.
Yeah, it's a Saints town, right? I mean, it's the Saints and then whatever else.
It's never been a basketball town. It's the Saints and LSU.
Yeah, more so. You're exactly right. Yeah, LSU basketball probably as big as
it is.
There. Maybe you send Ben Simmons there. How about Ben Simmons to Philly for Zion? And obviously Philadelphia would have to throw in more pieces.
Yeah, you'd have to throw in Embiid too.
Oof.
Yeah, they're not trading Zion.
No.
Again, this is why the story is interesting because they're such amazing young players, and you're like, oh, they're upset. Everybody's working the trade machines. They have absolutely no reason to trade them because they have them under contract for like 6-7 more years. It's just not going to happen.
As much as the story of the NFL offseason has been Aaron Rodgers wants out of Green Bay, they don't have to trade him. He signed. He could retire. He'd have to give back a big portion of his signing bonus. At some point, Green Bay may trade him, but they don't have to. So as high in the league as Aaron Rodgers is, and there's Brady, Rodgers, Mahomes, and Russell Wilson. They're the Mount Rushmore quarterbacks in the NFL right now. Even Russell Wilson, who was getting antsy in Seattle, he's still on the Seahawks. Rodgers doesn't really have the wiggle room to force a trade. He can retire, which I don't think he wants to do. Brady was fortunate he worked it that he could be a free agent at the end of the 2019 season. It took him 20 years to get there, right? And finally they said, okay, we're not going to be able to franchise you, and he was on his merry way. So I mean, it's tough to move. LeBron has made it doable, especially in the NBA, but you've got to kind of wait for your turn. You can't just do it after 2 or 3 years.
LeBron did 7 years initially.
7 years in Cleveland, yeah. And then from there, it's been 4 in Miami, 4 in Cleveland, and he's going into his 4th with the Lakers.
So Luka just finished year 3 in Dallas. Zion just finished year 2 in New Orleans. It's going to be a while. These guys are not going to be available for a while. So really much ado about nothing, I think. And I expect both those teams will improve as their young stars improve and they add more pieces around them and maybe new coaches. No reason that they shouldn't. So I would venture to guess that those guys will be happier in short order.
Isn't the solution to everything this year Dame Lillard? But what do you have to give up to get him?
New Orleans can trade for him because they have interesting pieces. Dallas has nothing to offer. Anybody.
They have nothing to offer. Yeah.
Nothing.
Kristaps Porzingis, he's a bad contract.
No one wants the contract.
No, it's a bad contract for a guy who averaged, 5.7 rebounds per game? I mean, how at 7'3" do you average that? That just
so you can only trade it for another bad contract. Like Kemba Walker for Porzingis would work, and it maybe might make sense for both those teams. I know that's been talked about. It might actually be nice to have somebody who's more reliable scorer in Kemba Walker to go beside Luka Doncic, and the Celtics could use a big man. So maybe that works. They're both shitty contracts, so neither team's going to feel great about it.
Yeah, it was like at that point when Chris Paul was traded for Russell Westbrook, it was because of the contracts.
Yeah,
now, Westbrook's gone on and played well for the last 2 years, and Chris Paul could have been the MVP of the league this year. And now I think teams are kicking themselves for not getting Chris Paul. I mean, could you picture the Milwaukee Bucks with Chris Paul right now?
Yeah, that's the move they should have made. We talked about that, I think, at the beginning
talked about
of the
it
season.
6-8 months ago.
They
that
should
was
have
the
made
move
it.
to make.
They were interested in it. The Celtics should have made that move too.
Anyone.
Tried to get him. Anybody.
Yep.
Yeah, no, teams are kicking themselves for sure.
Yep.
Good on Phoenix for doing that.
Yeah, they acted.
So that's going to do it for us today, Sap, on the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out both of our Twitters for all the latest on the show at JohnSap2525 or at Jet Striar, JETSTRIAR. And we're also on YouTube if you're not watching there already. youtube.com/JetStriar. We'll be back tomorrow with a new edition of the podcast and let you know if the Nets are headed to the Eastern Conference Finals or if the Bucks are forcing Game 7 and preview the rest of the games that are going to happen tomorrow. We'll be there then. See you, everybody.